Lavrov has lost his status as head of the delegation at the G20 summit, and now the delegation at this summit, which will take place later this month, will be led by Maxim Oreshkin, the deputy head of President Putin's administration. Who is Maxim Oreshkin? What has he done to deserve such an honor? And why is he replacing Lavrov himself as the head of the delegation? Friends, this is a very big and rather complicated question. But it could indicate that Lavrov is someone who is, in fact, preparing to leave soon. Why is that? Well, perhaps because of his inability to establish a proper dialogue and normal contact with the United States today. Lavrov has been getting into trouble, since April. Let's count from the moment Donald Trump was inaugurated. And now it's already being noted. In fact, yes, many months of his fruitful, successful cooperation in resolving numerous military conflicts around the world, right? Well, the resentment about the Nobel Prize is a separate story. But still, today, Lavrov stands in the way of resolving and closing the so-called Ukrainian issue for Washington. He stands in the way. No one in Washington can communicate with this person today, or wants to. Take a good look at this face. If you've never really looked at Lavrov before, you can see that he absolutely doesn't care about anything that's happening. Rubio openly said that he doesn't like this face because it looks tired. And it's so tired that it doesn't want to deal with the issue of negotiations or with the issue of organizing a summit between Putin and Donald Trump. Whether it's in Budapest or not in Budapest, that's already a secondary question. But this is being said by the Secretary of State. And that phrase, which was circulated a couple of weeks ago, it hasn't just disappeared without a trace. Friends, diplomacy is not an instant story. It's not about sudden flashes. It's a cumulative story where the effect builds up over time. And now today, when this effect reaches a critical point and no one in America wants to communicate with the head of the Kremlin's foreign ministry, it turns into a huge problem. Moreover, today, pay attention, Lavrov is not attending very serious security meetings in the Kremlin. Even Russian propagandists have already noticed this. He's simply not there. I want to draw your attention to one more story, who is now commenting on various issues on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I understand that Ryabkov tried to do this somehow, yes, about a month ago. Ryabkov, by the way, is Lavrov's deputy, but he's also Lavrov's right-hand man. And Ryabkov slipped up on the most ordinary things, like when he said, remember that the Anchorage impulse was exhausted. And after that phrase, that was it. That was the final straw, obviously, for the administration of the Russian dictator Putin. The final straw. Ryabkov hasn't appeared on air since. He delivered another fatal blow to himself when he stated, after Lavrov's phone conversation, that you can't cancel or postpone something that was never agreed upon. And that was it. And then after this completely failed communication, another spokesperson appeared at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For now, the acting spokesperson is the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Galuzin. And today, Mikhail Galuzin is not exactly using peacekeeping rhetoric. Look, it's obvious that this is Putin's directive right now. Moscow is ready to continue direct negotiations. And now all the conditions exist for the development of the Istanbul track. By the way, today Viktor, if you haven't heard, is saying the same thing. He says we need to start small now and return to carefully preparing high-level meetings from a lower level. And now Galuzin and Viktor are a Moscow-Washington tandem trying to make up for lost time. After the so-called Anchorage impulse, according to him, Galuzin, the only problem remains the lack of political will on Kyiv's part. This is rhetoric that is now absolutely unacceptable to anyone. Next, look, Dmitriev is continuing his tour here, and that's not just a coincidence either. If you are familiar with certain Russian public pages and you follow them, or perhaps you follow my reviews, you know that after Dmitriev's trip to the USA, which lasted a whole 5 days and ended up with basically nothing, he received a direct slap from the US Secretary of the Treasury, who told Dmitry that he is a propagandist who is not authorized to say what he says and that no one should listen to him. There was a lot of criticism and a wave of backlash against Dmitry, saying that he failed at everything, that he is not a diplomat at all, and that he should practically be put in prison there. But now all of this is ending differently. Dmitry is not returning to Moscow, but is continuing his tour. while in Saudi Arabia, he continues to do quite a lot. Well, given the current situation and in general, this whole paradigm about, how should I put it, the fundamental causes of the Ukrainian crisis. He says that the war will end within a year, and he's confident about that. And that Washington and Moscow today are closer than ever. They are close in their positions. There are basically no problems at all. Yes, he repeats some things, some of Putin's mantras in a way, yes, but, well, for example, about Ukrainian neutrality, but now he does it very cautiously because there is a specific agenda to appease Donald Trump. The sanctions imposed against partners, companies, and countries that buy Russian raw materials are now leading to entire industries in some countries coming to a halt. And the problem with Lukoil and Rosneft is turning into a global issue, which is now putting so much pressure on prices, particularly for the Urals brand, for example, that now it is even falling below the level declared in the European sanctions package, you see? Today, the price has already dropped to around $60 or even lower, I mean less. Negative growth, you see? So Dmitriev continues, his trips and his statements. And it is Dmitriev, my friends, who, as you may already know, is now being seriously considered as a potential replacement for Lavrov, serving as a person, once again, who is known for having a completely different and distinct approach to the art and practice of diplomacy. I actually have a relevant quote here. Let me take a moment to read it to you right now, as it has just appeared and been published regarding this particular matter. The main argument for why it should be specifically Dmitriev, just a moment, let me find it. I saved it here somewhere. It all comes down to the fact that Dmitriev is our representative and proponent. Here it is. Yes, Dmitriev is skilled at handling complex negotiations. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he considers it an ineffective and outdated institution and traditional diplomacy as something archaic. He relies more on personal contacts to achieve results. This was said by an official who has worked with Dmitriev for a long time. So, look, this is the key point here. He relies on personal contacts. American diplomacy now, actually the whole American cabinet under Donald Trump, is basically built on personal relationships. And Dmitriev fits into this story just fine. The fact that Bessing called him a propagandist is simply a message to Putin, a signal that he should stop pumping the person up with all these ideological stories that make no sense at all. What's needed is specifics, concessions, and a proper dialogue, and a realistic perception of the current situation. No one is just going to hand over Donbas to anyone. There is already a front line on the occupied and seized territories, and that's where everything should stop. That's all there is to it. So anything beyond that is just propaganda. That's exactly why I explained why Basin, the Ministry of Finance, calls him a propagandist. And the Ministry of Finance as well. BSNT is not authorized to negotiate with Dmitry, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so on. That's a different track. But today, the Ministry of Finance is the spearhead of pressure on the Russian Federation, and by the way, it's working quite well at the moment. That's the story. And today, the Hungarian press is writing about how it will all end. For example, the publication Magyar Nemzet, a very reputable outlet in Hungary, has released a piece quoting Viktor Orbán. You know that Viktor Orbán has now gone to the United States of America, and he is going to have a meeting with Donald Trump. There are certain issues there that also concern Ukraine and Ukraine's future accession to the European Union. It is clear that something will have to be conceded. This is in Orbán's own interest, or he may be able to secure political support from Donald Trump, which he will need next year when the elections take place. And the elections are 50-50 for Orbán. Perhaps he will finish this term and it will be his last as prime minister. Forever. Farewell. So what does Orbán say? There are only one or two issues where there are disagreements between Moscow and the USA. One or two issues. Once these are resolved, a meeting, a summit in Budapest can be held immediately. This is absolutely realistic. One or two issues. Orbán is the go-between for Putin and Donald Trump. And believe me, Orbán's meeting with Donald Trump is, in fact, a meeting with a messenger from over there, from across the ocean, one of the suzerains just like that. So No one has really authorized Orbán to be a mediator in any official capacity, but today, at this very moment, he is a better mediator and a better spokesperson than this person and even this person.